To start off with, it's a carving technique where slip is inlaid into the clay body of the object. And the first thing you do, step number one, is at the leather hard stage, you carve your design or image into the wall of your object. And usually it's linear, and you want to make sure that the depth of your carving or scratching is wide enough to allow for slip to fill into it. So if it's too thin, too delicate, slip may not get in there. And if it's too deep, it may take too much of the scraping process. You'd have to remove so much of the wall to get down to that inlaid smoothness. So you want the width and depth to be around maybe 1/16 of an inch. And that's kind of what I've got here in the surface of this. So on this side of the T-bowl, I've already applied my slip, and it's been drying for quite a while. But I'm going to show you on this side how to apply the slip, because you really want to do it very generously. You don't want to be conservative about it. You really want to lay it in there in a very thick way. So here's an example. I've got some thick slip here, and I'm really filling my brush, and I'm really going to let it fill in. I mean, it's quite thick, right? And making sure it's getting into all the lines. If there was a significant part of my object that didn't have any kind of decoration or design, I wouldn't even be applying my slip to that area, because it'll just be scraped off later. So really thick. I mean, it's almost like frosting on the surface there. That's going to take quite a while to dry, so I won't get to the scraping process on that today. Maybe much later if I wait. But let me kind of take you to the next step. So it was carving first, then application of slip very generously, and then we're going to do the final step, which is to scrape. And these flexible metal ribs, quite sharp, and they flex, so they'll conform to the curve. And you could also do this on the interior. It would just be a little bit more difficult to scrape. And then I do this very gradually. So I'm going to first start to slowly taking my rib across the surface, and I clean. If I have any slip that's sticking to my rib, I'm cleaning it off. I'll do just an area so you can kind of see what I mean by gradual. If I don't clean my rib off, I'm just kind of smearing the slip around rather than removing it. So I'm going to now, this has kind of a bell shape to it, so I've got to be really a little bit more careful, kind of up into these curved, flared areas. And you want to be cautious not to be too aggressive and over scrape, because if you over scrape, you could remove completely some of your carved design. I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to start doing the bottom here by the foot. So now, right, the design still looks a little rough, right? That's one kind of scraping. Now I'm going to do another pass in that same area, where I'm going to go in now and maybe alternate the direction of how I scraped before. Try to be a little bit more precise in terms of the design. You can kind of see how it's starting to become cleaner and clearer, right, as I start to scrape. Continue. So eventually the surface is smooth, so you end up kind of like going down flush, right, with your the carved out area. So the surface ends up not having any kind of physical carved texture. And that colored slip, that contrasting slip, and in this case, it's a kind of a cobalt blue slip, which will look gray at this stage, but once it gets fired, that cobalt will become very, very blue. So it'll be a very kind of classic kind of blue and white, because this clay that I'm using is kind of a white, pretty bright white clay. Almost there. I'm just going to do this little flared lip here. Probably the trickiest part. Might have to flip my rib over, use the curved part of the rib. There we go, that helped. Maybe go in the other direction too. There we go. There. Okay. So then I would work my way around, because that area is done. Right? See that area right there? And it's all very, very smooth. Right? As I can pull my finger across that and not feel any carved texture at all. Right? So that's the Mishima technique. And it's pretty tricky. Don't get discouraged. I find, make sure you wait long enough before you do your scraping, because if you try to scrape when that slip is still a little too moist, it's going to really stick to your scraping tool, and also kind of smear, right? Your clay body and the slip will actually start to kind of like blend together. It'll get a little mottled and a little messy. So I tend to kind of like wait till that slip is, not completely dry, but pretty darn close. If you do forget and the slip completely dries and gets completely bone dry, it's not the worst thing. You can still scrape. It'll just be very dusty. Make sure maybe you wear a mask if you're going to do bone dry scraping, so you don't breathe in that dust. So that's the Mishima technique, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. Here's a finished example of a piece that's been glazed, that had some Mishima on it. Right, so again, that was a black slip on a white clay, so it ends up being very black and white. So thank you very much, and hope you enjoyed it.